State. But my background is in psychology and developmental cognitive neuroscience. So I just came into the libraries at Penn State, and prior to that, I had just over a decade of primary research experience. So this is kind of inspired a little bit by what I saw as a researcher and what I've experienced as a research data management librarian. And predominantly that experience has kind of shown me, it's an experience I had myself, but also I still see in graduate students that kind of the prototypical journey to build research data management among young researchers is kind of this game of telephone where we're really passing skills from student to student, or from postdoc to graduate student to undergraduate student. And it kind of leads to people who have maybe a slightly rocky foundation in research data management, training others that have less of a foundation. And so as they continue to grow and learn, they add new pieces to their training. And then when they're a senior graduate student or postdoc, they end up training other mentees. And so you kind of have this continuous cycle where some research data management skills are improving with a new graduate student, but others are being lost through this kind of game of telephone. So this is kind of the context in which I've seen and experienced research data management from my own perspective. There still continues to be a lack of really formalized training in research data management among researchers or graduate programs. You are seeing more statistical training, but rarely do those classes incorporate what we would really consider to be research data management skills. The other component that we face with research data management training, I'm sure as we're all aware, is that most researchers, whether they're student researchers or tenure track or tenured professors, have very limited time, resources, and funding to devote to research data management training. And working lab groups and collaborations often have limited capacity to integrate brand new practices or processes related to research data management. Often they're working in a system that they inherited or built a very long time ago, and it would take substantial resources to completely rehaul that system. That, on top of the limited formal training that I kind of introduced before, makes it a challenge even when researchers are really interested in improving and building on research data management skills. It makes it a challenge to implement them. So I've left with this question of like, where can I intervene then? Where would be most useful, where they're not just learning about research data management and what they should be doing, but that they'd actually bring something back and try and implement it, or have the capacity to implement it. And that's where I kind of had the idea and came up with this idea of good enough research data management. So we're not shooting for the stars here or trying to do something very complex or really high tech. Really, I'm looking for what would be good enough. What would I be happy to see somebody try to build into their systems? So these good enough practices really have to be relatively low effort if they're actually going to take place. They have to have immediate benefits that researchers can see, and ideally also be beneficial moving into the future as well. And ideally, they would increase the reusability of data. So often when I pitch this, I'm not coming from the perspective of open science per se, but how to increase the reusability and sustainability of data in your lab. So a common problem is that a graduate student works on a project, develops their thesis, works with their data, and then graduates and leaves that data in a state amounts of documentation and organization. Then a new student comes in and they inherit that project. Making that more usable, making it more efficient for that second graduate student to come in and be able to work with that data quickly is of interest. of time thinking about what are good enough data management practices. And I came up with about a list of 7 that I focused on in a couple different workshop series. There are probably more, and we can discuss what you all think would qualify kind of as the low burden, shallow learning curve, immediately beneficial, increasing openness of research. And the first good enough data management practice is preserving raw data. So this is in the context where there are not terabytes and terabytes of data. It's useful to keep a copy of data that is untouched. So we know data isn't always ready to be used. It needs to go through different processing steps. But by keeping that and preserving that raw data untouched, there's kind of a ground truth or a place to go back to retest pipelines. And there's no concern then that there's any manipulation.
Alaina, you're cutting in and out.
Okay, so sorry, it must be my headphones. Let me see if I can.
We lost the last like 30 seconds.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, I might just switch off of headphones and go out loud, and hopefully that would. Are you able to hear me? I apologize for that.
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay. Sorry, Bluetooth failed me today. So I was just saying that preserving the raw data is a tip I give just to preserve the ground truth of the data if it is not a data storage, if there's not data storage barriers. The second one would be to create a central hub. This is where I talk about directory structures and designing kind of file organizations that could be replicable across projects. It goes hand in hand with variable naming best practices. Preserving the journey is really talking about version control, whether it be solutions for manually using file names to do version control or implementing statistical or software related solutions such as Git or GitHub. I also talk about avoiding manual manipulations of data when at all possible, and documenting any kind of manual manipulations that are done really well. Tidying or having quote unquote tidy data is really where I talk about how to format data in a way that most statistical software recognizes. So observations in rows, variables in columns, one piece of data per cell. And then metadata is I touch on just very briefly with README files and data dictionaries. This is supposed to, again, be what is an overview of like 7 things that you could do that would just bump up the accessibility of your data a small amount. So just to give an example of what one of these would look like, I'll give you a brief view of what I would present for creating the central hub one. So I really talk here about directory structures and organizations with the goal of having attendees think about what are the abstract categories that they need to manage their projects or their classes, and can we have the first few levels of a directory be replicable across projects? So in a research lab context, could every research lab have the same set of first directory names? So data, admin, code, how can we abstract so that anybody who enters a project directory in that lab knows exactly where to find each element of data or of code or protocol, because it's the same across projects. The other thing I do as part of these presentations is I try and highlight why that practice of research data management makes their project more open or their data more open. And I also try to highlight what's the next step or what's the bigger lift, right? These are good enough practices. So what's next? And so in the context of directory structure and management, The kind of big lift here would be matching field standards or data standards such as the brain imaging data standards or MIXIS, or others. Or for the fields that don't have a data standard, aligning with or creating a lab data standard that everybody would follow, or a collaboration group data standard that everybody could follow across projects. I try, depending on time, to do little activities for some of these. So an activity I often do with directory or project management is to have them identify a folder on their computer for either a project or a class, and then think through how they might redesign it, or what would those abstract categories be that would allow them to have the first couple levels of their directory structure replicable across whether it's classes. So for example, they might have homeworks, projects, readings that could be used across multiple classes, or for research projects, as we kind of said before, data, code, admin. So where have we kind of gone with this? So I've done a version of these good enough research data management presentations at 5 different workshops or workshop series or boot camps across the last few years. We have a semi-yearly open science boot camp that this is incorporated into, and we're now doing a yearly kind of 3/4 day mini boot camp each spring semester that is really focused on this topic. We go a little bit more in depth on those because we have a little bit more time. We always start, for example, in these 3/4 day workshops with the good enough practices, but then we're able to build in a lot more interactive time. So we have a whole session dedicated just to interactive workshop file naming and directory management, where we go kind of in groups or individually through that worksheet, and thinking about file naming conventions, and designing a data standard for your own lab or your own work. But then we're also able to take it full circle in these 3/4 day sessions where we can talk about how to use that to prepare your data for sharing and what repositories you might be able to identify to use, and do a full interactive workshop on metadata then as well, where we can actually write README files together or start working on data dictionaries and things such as that. So the feedback on these types of presentations have been really positive. One might be concerned that those who have experience in research data management or highly skilled in statistics may not be as interested, but what we've found from feedback is even those that have a lot of skills are identifying new things that can improve their processes. It tends to generalize really well across scientific disciplines because we're not getting too specific. Most of these practices benefit people who work with data or files in general. And we get a lot of requests for follow-ups. So people will ask, hey, can we do a whole workshop on just this one section that you talked about, or just this one practice? So just version control, can we get a whole workshop on that? Or our most requested follow-up is actually on the directory structures in organizations, which I find really interesting because I think if we just offered a workshop on directory structures, we wouldn't get that high of attendance. But after attending this good enough research data management workshop, that is our most requested follow-up workshop for lab groups, or for example, like Graduate Women in Science organization has requested it multiple times. So this seems to be kind of a foot in the door for a lot of people to get an overview of research data management that isn't too intimidating. And then they end up wanting to develop those skills further. So I just want to acknowledge our research data stewardship program. Brianna Wham is the head of that now. And I work as part of that program at the university libraries at Penn State. We also have a faculty group of volunteers called the Open Scholarship Initiative, where we're working to form a community of scholars that are interested in open scholarship on Penn State's campus that I work with as well, and have done a lot of these workshops through and with their support. And I've noticed that the chat was going, but I wasn't able to fully keep up with it, but if anybody has any questions or wants to chat at all, I'm happy to talk further about this. I can.
Thanks so much, Alaina. So there weren't any specific questions that have come up in the chat, but there are a few comments. There are a couple of resources that folks shared. One was a good source for guidance on formatting data in spreadsheets in a tidy fashion that is often referred to. And then that was from Rob O'Reilly, and then Marla Hertz also recommended all of Kristen Brownie's book, Data Management Workbook. Both have now bookmarked to read. But a lot of support for the topic is near and dear to many of the people in the session. And some of the frustrations in terms of using cloud when you're trying to do file management and how that can complicate things. I don't know if you have experiences to share from your own work.
Yeah, cloud is interesting with the syncing. It is often actually a question that comes up as part of this is what to do with data that is shared. So you have like a large R01 study, for example, in a research lab, and then multiple students or multiple researchers are accessing that data. And I always advocate, because it's normally on a shared cloud service, that we keep even our process data kind of preserved in a sense. And people, if file size limits are not a barrier, to make copies of those and, work with them in their own directory systems that follow, hopefully, lab conventions for research data management. But
any other questions? Feel free to come off mic, ask questions, or in the chat. One thing I was curious about was the file naming convention one. And so I was a little bit surprised when you said that was one of your most popular, because in some ways, it's like the most tedious kind of thing, right? And so I don't know if you can say just a little bit more about like your approach to it, like how you have cracked the nut in making that like the most popular thing ever.
I think it's honestly having, I almost always do or try and incorporate an element of the directory management interactive piece, and having people, prompting people to look at a directory they know frustrates them and then like start trying to think through how to organize it. I think as people start doing that activity, even if in their own mind, you start to realize how many decision points there are in designing directory structures for large projects or even for small projects or classes. And I think people get intrigued by the kind of logic or brain teaser aspect of it. And then they start thinking about, like, if I name it this way, or what if I name it this way, or do I store my data by observation or subject, or do I store it by instrument, or what type of data was collected? And so people start interacting with that activity in that way a little more personally. And I think specifically because we try and get them to pick a directory that is frustrating for them to work in. And then it becomes more interesting, I think, to them to follow up and say, so how would I do this? Like, how do we structure this? We've also done, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I love it. Like you basically turn it into a puzzle and it becomes like a game that you work through.
We've also designed like a fake data set that is really poorly organized, where we have lots of different file types and really terrible inconsistent naming conventions, and everything's just like thrown in one folder. And that is an interactive worksheet where we break them up into like lab groups to have them organize and create their own data standard. And so that's one we do with like the graduate women in science.
Okay, awesome. We're just at about time, but I there was one last question that came in about how did you get so many people to attend these workshops on a topic that people at my university tend to only think about reactively at the end, maybe something around promo, or if you just built it case by case. And if we can wrap after you answer this question.
So the open science, so part of this, it started at the Open Science Boot Camp that we run, which is a 2.5-day free conference. We have like plenaries, keynote speakers, multi-session workshops so people can kind of choose their own adventure. And we provide food and it's free. So that's helpful. And that gets, I guess, gets people interested a little bit. The 3/4 day workshops, we also provide food at, and it's free as well. We get a lot of people who send representatives from their labs. So like people are intrigued and so they'll send somebody to like learn a little more about it. But just advertising to graduate students, research staff, and postdocs. We do get a fair number of like early career faculty, but they would probably be lower represented relative to the graduate students and postdocs.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for
Thank
your
you.
presentation. It was such a great topic and very grateful to learn from you. All right, next we have Stacy Winchester, who will be presenting on the SHARPGrads program, keeping with helping support graduate skill preparation. So I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the entire SEDLS Planning Committee and to all of you for being here today. I'm Stacy Winchester. I'm the Research Data Librarian at the University of South Carolina. And for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to discuss with you a program at my university that I began about 6 years ago and that I continue to manage called SHARPGrads. SHARPGrads stands for the Skills, Habits, and Research Program for Graduate Students. It's a free year-long workshop series, mostly virtual workshop series, and certificate of completion program. Hundreds of students at my university have participated in SHARPGrads since its inception in 2019, with many of them finishing the program. And as we go through this today, I love some of the tie-ins I'm seeing between our last presenter and what I'm here to talk to you about today. That's very cool. So what I'm going to do is talk about prioritizing graduate student research skills training, what we've learned since we started SHARPGrads, and a few of the important points you might want to know about if you're interested in doing something similar at your university, or if you just want another viewpoint about providing graduate student education in research skills training. Of course, this is a short presentation, so I'm not going to be able to tell you really about anything in great detail, but I hope to leave you with some ideas for your institution or maybe points of discussion if you'd like to talk to me more about it down the road. Before we do any of that, though, here's just a little bit about my university. USC is the flagship university in South Carolina. We are in Columbia at the center of the state in the capital, and we just crossed the 40,000 student threshold at the Columbia campus, which is the main campus, of course, and we have about 8,000 graduate students at USC Columbia. So as I mentioned, SHARPGrads stands for the Skills, Habits, and Research Program for Graduate Students, and it's open to anyone who's enrolled in graduate courses at USC Columbia. So USC is actually a statewide system. We've got a number of campuses and about 55,000 students statewide. And some of these campuses have graduate students and some of them don't. For now, this program is limited to USC Columbia. That in the future, it would be amazing to open it up for all of our campus systems. But for now, some of the content that we cover in SHARPGrads is really only available to USC Columbia students. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense to open it up. As I'll also discuss in a bit, the success of this program is largely based on my ability to manually dot a bunch of I's and cross a bunch of T's sort of administratively. So while we've streamlined this program over the last 6 years since it began, and I hope that someday it'll be feasible to add people from outside of my home campus, we haven't done it yet. So for the purposes of SEDLS, I have billed SHARPGrads as a data skills training program, and it certainly is. But in the spirit of full transparency, there's also a lot of non-data-centric training that's available for the students who have registered for SHARPGrads. The program is a collaborative effort between university libraries, our university's research computing department, university press, and the graduate school. And while I and some of my colleagues at the library, and of course my colleagues at research computing are certainly teaching data-related content, you might imagine that, for example, the university press is not. As I mentioned, SHARPGrads is a free, year-long, mostly virtual workshop series that intends to introduce graduate students to research skills that are needed in graduate school and beyond, but that are often not covered in the curriculum of any class. So think research data management or, introductory Python, things their advisors might expect them to be able to do that they might not have actually had any kind of training in. Each year, a SHARPGrads cohort begins in the fall and ends toward the end of that following spring semester. Students who are registered each take the same 3 required sessions and at least 2 more from a long list of options. These sessions are either 50 or 75 minutes in length, and that's because we align our workshop timing with the university's class calendar so that they don't have to miss more than one class if they want to attend one of ours, so that hopefully they can find a time when they're totally free to attend from start to finish. So think like, your regular Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday class meeting times. Students have the fall and the spring semester to complete a total of at least 5 sessions. The bar for completion of SHARPGrads is pretty low. All they really have to do is attend. We hope it sparks their curiosity. But our sessions are not meant to impart expertise. They're short introductions to a topic or a skill. And then we, as librarians or whoever is the one who is providing the training, make sure that they know where to go to learn more. We also want them to, be able to have an intelligent conversation about X, Y, or Z concept that they learned in SHARPGrads. So I mentioned that each student takes the same 3 sessions. They are basics of research data management, introduction to publishing and scholarly journals, and graduate student research toolbox. So in basics of RDM, I take students through some data management practices that can be implemented right away in their workflow, that kind of transcend disciplines, and that can also be utilized when they're dealing with other kinds of files that they want to make sure they retain access to and can reuse long-term. Could be school files, work files, personal files, whatever. Introduction to publishing and scholarly journals is led by a colleague, and she helps graduate students understand the writing and publishing process and how they can understand their bundle of copyright and their publication agreements. And then Graduate Student Research Toolbox is a library-specific research lesson that provides graduate students with searching and services information about our libraries. So while only one of the 3 required sessions is data specific, there are a ton of other data specific options available. So as I mentioned, on top of the 3 requirements to complete SHARPGrads, students have to select a minimum of 2 additional ones. And they can actually come to every single offering that SHARPGrads has if they want to, and actually some pretty much do, but they need to choose at least 2 more. And those options include things like R&R Studio, Python, lots of data visualization courses. I say courses like hour-long sessions, information about APIs, lots of generative AI. We've got text analysis, Git and GitHub, digital research projects, even things like publishing, monographs, and understanding research fraud. So there are, there's a lot to offer. And so since graduate students are busy people, often with full-time jobs and families of their own, we offer most of our sessions more than once per semester, and we repeat them in the spring. So for example, I offer my required session, Basics of Research Data Management, 3 times each semester, alternating days and times to kind of make it easier for the most number of students to find the best opportunity to come at a time that's convenient to them. Most of our optional sessions are offered at least twice per semester as well. And there are ample opportunities for students to attend. So we do a lot of assessment in SHARPGrads. And when we ask our cohort members about the ease of registering for sessions, they usually say, yes, it was very easy. SHARPGrad sessions are almost always online, and they are all synchronous. We do not generally allow students to watch a recording of a SHARPGrad session for credit in the program, because I don't really have a good way to verify that they actually watched it. But on a rare occasion, we will break that rule. So for example, last year, our university closed because of a hurricane on the day that I was providing my last required session of the year. And I wanted to, make sure that students were able to complete the program. So I sent them a recording that I already had hanging out and asked them to write a short reflection paper that I have to be due in a week. And it was like a couple of paragraphs. So it was no big deal in order to count them as having completed it. We utilize SpringShare's LibCal system for registration and marking attendance. So each session instructor downloads their attendance sheet from either Teams or Zoom, whichever one they're more comfortable using. And then they go into LibCal to confirm attendance. And they do that using their attendance list from their streaming platform. I do a lot of double checking because I have those original attendance lists as well to make sure that every person's attendance was tracked properly. We don't have a system that does this automatically. We don't have a good system for this. Hence my mention of a lot of administrative work on my end. It works out fairly well. Mistakes can happen, however, when counting attendance. So for example, this year we have 100 students participating in SHARPGrads. And that's a lot of tracking. I also have 9 different people who offer these sessions throughout the year. And so everybody has to do their part in order for the tracking to happen appropriately. I work really hard to make sure that nobody gets missed, though. So why do students like SHARPGrads? Well, for one thing, they get to learn a new skill or at least be introduced to a new skill. They get a certificate of completion, and they love certificates of completion. They get a digital badge. We'll come back to that in just a moment. And they get a reception. So my budget for the SHARPGrads program is basically $0. But at the end of the year, my administration is willing, and I'm very happy that they will pay for food for a reception where the students can come in, get their picture taken with their certificate, and we all have a good time together. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about digital badges. A digital badge is a digital representation or designation of some kind of accomplishment. So digital badges can be displayed in LinkedIn profiles, personal websites, digital CVs, and any other digital environment. And then potential employers or collaborators can click on a link to see the badge and see what the people learned as part of it. So when a student completes the program, they're awarded this badge. And for this, I'm using the free version of Canvas badges, used to be called Canvas credentials. Because I'm using the free version, my university does not have an enterprise solution for digital badging. I was able to create one badge, and I can, here's a little pictorial representation, and then hopefully you're able to see this. I've left the slideshow. This is, I awarded it to myself. I'm a SHARPGrad. It's got, earning criteria and then a narrative about what I did in order to earn this badge. I can hand out as many of these or award as many of these as I want to, but I can't create any others, which is a bit of a bummer because I'd love to offer micro badges. And I'd love to create a badge for a similar undergraduate program that I hope to be about to start planning with our honors college. But so far, this has worked out fine for SHARPGrads. Okay, so who takes SHARPGrads classes? Classes is like class with a little c. Of course, this is just a certificate of completion and nobody's getting any real credit for anything. The majority of the students who register in SHARPGrads are doctoral students. This is last year's registration information. We had about half as many people, and I'll explain why. We had about half as many people last year. Almost all of them are doctoral students. And one was a non-degree grad student. And then, here is kind of a layout of representation across our campus unit, colleges and schools. Last year, most of the colleges on campus had representation from graduate students. A couple didn't, but over the course of the last several years, every students from every college on campus have taken SHARPGrads. So what have we learned? Well, we've learned a lot, but here are a few things you might be interested in. Participants in SHARPGrads. Participation in SHARPGrads earlier in the graduate program is better, according to the students, although far fewer participants are master's level than doctorate. And that's just the way it kind of goes every year, we get a lot of, I wish I'd known this sooner. I know you guys know what I'm talking about. You hear the same thing when you teach your skills. Students would much rather learn a new skill than hear a theoretical talk. Me too. I encourage all of my session presenters to include active learning in their sessions. So in Basics of RDM, for example, just like our last presenter, I go through a file naming and organization exercise together with them, and the students report that they get a lot from it. There are a lot of graduate students in the United States, and our graduate students are pretty hungry for anything that sets them apart from their peers. So they really like the certificate of completion, and they like the digital badge. They like getting the paper version of the certificate of completion. But anything that can kind of set them apart is something that they're very interested in. And generally, about 50% of students who sign up for sessions actually attend. And about 50% of students who register for SHARPGrads complete the program. So it's kind of the 50% rule. Sometimes it's a little bit more and sometimes it's a little bit less. And of course, for the sessions that are required for everybody to take, the participation is much higher. But for sure, sessions that are scheduled early in the semester have higher attendance. I get that because I'm kind of tired toward the end of the semester as well. I find that in the fall semester, like November 1, they're like dropping off. They're done. They're thinking about Thanksgiving. And in the spring semester, by April 1st, people are really kind of done with this sort of extra stuff that they're doing with their time. So, and this probably won't be too surprising to you. The bigger the program is, the more work it is. So my dean this past year wanted to grow the program. So we did. Last year, I think we had 52 students registered for SHARPGrads. And this year, we opened it up for registration way earlier than we normally do. We opened it up in March. And we re-advertised again when the students came back in the fall. I set a 100-person cap for this program this year because it's a lot of detail-oriented, like checking off of attendance. And I thought 100 sounded like kind of the max that I was interested in managing this year. But we did hit that cap. So everybody's really enjoying it, I think. And I'm really pleased with the way things are going. When we have grown, obviously, when we piloted this program in 2019, it was under the name Graduate Student Research Bootcamp, kind of like our last presenter. It was a 2-day in-person event with breakout sessions of the students choosing. There was no certificate of completion. There were no virtual options. There was no digital badge. The jump to virtual for this program mostly happened in 2020, which probably isn't too much of a surprise. And we found that students really do like the online options. So for example, I have an in-person cleaning messy data with OpenRefine session scheduled in person because it's open source software, and trying to wrangle all of that online can be difficult. And I have 3 people registered. So I think they like virtual, although I really love offering it in person as well. So obviously this is by no means a complete list of how to start a similar program, but a couple of things I would like to share with you are that if you do want to do something like this, consider repackaging or differently promoting existing workshops. That's what we did. Actually, anybody can come to SHARPGrads workshops. They just can't register for SHARPGrads like faculty come, undergrads come. We promote it differently depending on the audience that we're advertising to, but only graduate students can actually register for the program itself. I am, let's see, where was it? Oh yeah, make sure you have strong support from library administration because it's going to take a lot of time and it might cost some money too. Approach partners. So if your university doesn't have the capacity, if your library doesn't have the capacity to teach Python or R in R Studio, like your research computing might, and maybe they would like an opportunity to better promote their own workshops. If you already have a system in place to manage attendance and generate outputs, such as digital badges, I think you are ahead of the game. And if you're interested in talking further about SHARPGrads, I'd love to do so at another time. And one more thing that I wanted to mention that I left off of my last slide is that every year have been, for the last 3 years, I've been participating as a site host in the DSCPE capstone program. I'm going to pop the URL into, you can see I was making sure I knew how to share my Zoom screen. Okay, never mind. Oh, here it is. Sorry, it's hard to share just because there's a box behind it. Okay, my bad. This is the DSCPE capstone program. You work with a partner who is a newer data librarian. And this year, my data librarian partner is someone from App State, and she's helping me with my post-session and post-program surveys. So thank you so much. And I look forward to answering any questions you have. I do know that there's, oh, somebody had already put it in the chat. I do know that some people put some in there, and I will answer currently. Let's see, I may have missed this. Have any of the graduate programs endorsed, recommended, required it? Nobody requires it, but I do have a lot of graduate programs that send advertisement about SHARPGrads out to suggest that their students enroll in it. Okay, we've answered the question about the badges. How often do you offer the required sessions? Yeah, 2 or 3 times a semester. For me, 3 times. And who keeps track of the progress? It is I. It is all me. But that's fine. It's part of my job, and I really enjoy it. Any other questions?
There was just one other one earlier
Okay.
on. Do some of these sessions also count for external requirements, such as responsible conduct of research training for NIH?
No, that would be really rad if they did. But we have a experiential learning program at the university, and that's for undergraduates. But undergraduates who came to these did also get experiential learning credit for it. You know, they couldn't be in the SHARPGrads program because they're undergrads. But yeah, it has at times counted for other things.
Awesome. All right, we're slightly over time, so I don't want to keep folks, but feel free to hang back since the room, I believe, will be open during break. But thank you again
everyone.
so much for your presentation and sharing all of your great work. And now we'll go over to break, I believe.